Hello, San Diego. My name is Naor Meningher. I live in Tel Aviv, and like you, I guess we're all in quarantine nowadays. So I hope, first of all, most importantly, that you guys are staying home and staying safe and washing your hands at least 20 seconds, and that you love your family, your grandparents, your parents from afar and from a distance. So yeah, it's complicated times, but we're staying optimistic. I'm a filmmaker, and I also have a podcast. So we'll start with a shameless plug. I invite you to tune in. It's called Two Nice Jewish Boys. I do it with my friend Eitan. We've been doing the podcast for 4 years. And essentially, every week, we bring the most interesting Israelis for a conversation. And we've had Nobel Prize winners, we've had actors like Topol, we've had the creator of Fauda, and really fascinating people. And it's lots of fun, so you can find it on Spotify, on iTunes. Just search for Two Nice Jewish Boys. And so I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I was asked by Paul from the Jewish Film Festival to record myself telling you guys something interesting. So here's my best effort to do that. I graduated film school about 5 years ago. I studied in Tel Aviv University. And I decided to tell you guys about my next big project, my next documentary. And it's called The Bunker. And the story begins in the year 2013. I was in Tel Aviv University in film school, between the second and third year. You're doing a project. It's called the summer film, the summer project. And it's a very important stepping stone because it's not your graduation film, but it's your first big project that you're doing. And mine was called The Rat's Dilemma. And it's a 10-minute short fiction film. You can find it online on YouTube. And you're invited to Google it and watch it. And the story of this short film takes place during the Holocaust. And it's a sci-fi and Holocaust about this Jewish scientist who's working for the Nazis because they locked him up in a laboratory, and they forced him to build some groundbreaking technology. And he's stuck in this underground bunker building things for the Nazis, right? So I was looking, the main challenge when producing this movie was to find a location. Where do you shoot in Israel? Where do you shoot an underground Nazi bunker without breaking the bank by building a crazy set, right? It's not a privilege that a second-year film student has. So I was looking desperately for a location, and then I remembered that a year before I was working on a set of a commercial, and it was shot on this really crazy place, an underground bunker, deserted in Tel Aviv. So I was saying to myself, maybe there I can shoot it, and eventually we shot it there. And this place is a mystery, okay? It is located in Tel Aviv. There's a place called the Rabin Museum. It's a relatively new museum. It's about 15 years old. And it's in, if you know Tel Aviv, it's in Ramat Aviv. If you go on Rokach Street, it's a big building to your right, just across from the park. And the Rabin Museum is dedicated to the memory of our late Prime Minister, who was unfortunately murdered. And it's a very impressive new building. And turns out that its foundations is actually a secret bunker from the 1950s. And that bunker apparently was built by Germans. How do you know? Because inside of it, everything is in German. The machinery, the motherboards, everything is in German. And it's, as I said, it's deserted. And even then, when I was shooting, I was asking around, like, what's the story of this place? And the funny thing is, I heard all kinds of variations of fairy tales about it, but nobody could tell me exactly what's the history of this place. And that intrigued me. And then I finished this project, and the movie was really successful, and I traveled all around the world with it, and it was fun. But the bunker kept possessing me, and I was just couldn't stop thinking about that place because it's right here. And as the years went by, and I met all kinds of interesting people in Israel, also with my podcast, so people that are knowledgeable from the IDF, from the military, from all kinds of places, and nobody heard about this place, right? So it's a huge, I'll try to describe the place to you. It's a huge bunker, and you can't see traces of it outside. So if you don't know it's there, you'll never find out. And you go in, the place is huge. So in the metric system, it's 12,000 square meters. So go to Google, and I don't know how much. I'll write here down below how much it is in your system, but in square feet. So it's huge, and I've never seen such a huge place. It's all made of concrete, and as I said, everything inside is in German. So the place intrigued me. And finally, 2 years ago, I decided that I'm gonna make a documentary about the bunker. And the main plot line is me trying to find answers to my questions. And here are the questions, very simple questions. Who built this bunker? Who designed it? Why it was built? And was there a good reason to build it? Very simple questions, right? So I embarked on the journey. And the journey starts with historians. And I interviewed several historians. Again, all the Israeli historians that I met, nobody heard about this place, including historians who specialize in the 50s, who specialize in the history of Israel, in the military history of Israel. Nobody heard about this place. And it's not secret. I mean, it used to be secret in the 70s and the 80s, but it's not secret anymore. So how come nobody knows anything about it, right? It raises some questions. So here's what I found out initially. The bunker was built between the year 54 and 55. Its purpose was a power plant. Essentially, it was a secret underground bomb-protected power plant. And its purpose was that Ben-Gurion allegedly was afraid that if the Arabs attack Reading, which was the only power plant in Tel Aviv, that Israel will be left without any power sources and then will be annihilated, right? So somebody, it's still unclear who, said, okay, we can solve that by building an emergency power plant inside a bomb-protected bunker. But there were two problems with this idea. First of all, building a bunker is extremely complicated. It's an art. And nobody in the newborn Israel knew how to do that. Second of all, it's expensive as hell. And Israel in the early 50s was on the brink of bankruptcy. So how can we afford to build that? And here things start to get really dark, right? Because the answer to these questions was Germany. And Germany in the early 50s is divided to two. There's the East, controlled by Russia, and the West, controlled essentially by America and England and France, the Allies, and led by Adenauer. And Adenauer had a vision. He wanted to start a new page for Germany, and he realized the way to do that is reconciliation with Israel. But how will he do that? Well, he had money. Germany, after the war, was back on, West Germany that is, was back on their feet in a matter of no time. America helped them greatly with lots of money and funds and resources, and they got back to be the incredible industry leading country that they were before the war and during the war, right? Because the people were the same people and the talent was the same talent. So they had money, they had knowledge, they had industries. Israel, on the other hand, just emerged barely from the independence war, where 500,000 people beat an army of millions against all odds, and we barely got out, right? And the country was started to build itself, and there was a huge problem because Israel had, as I said, about 500,000 people, and within 2 years, like between the years 50 and 52, about 1 million refugees came. So the country's population tripled itself in a matter of a year, which is unthinkable. And this led to a situation where the country was almost went bankrupt. In the early 50s, there was no money left. Essentially, there was no money left, and the country was almost starving. The ships with wheat and with rice docked outside of Haifa port, and there was no money to pay them. And Ben-Gurion realized that Germany wants some kind of an agreement, and then they started to negotiate to what was eventually called the Reparations Agreement. And that was a very, very dark time in Israel because the reparations ripped the country apart to two sections. Ben-Gurion realized we need the money. The sum that was discussed was $1.5 billion, which in early 50s was a lot of money. And Ben-Gurion realized this money will save us. Without this money, we're doomed because we will starve to death. We have to accept the reparations. On the other side was Begin, leader of the opposition, and he essentially said that this is negotiating with the devil, and it's better to die than to get their bribery funds and forgive them for the Holocaust, and that they're buying our forgiveness with money, and that it's disgraceful. And behind Begin were lots of Holocaust survivors, and they demonstrated in the squares, and it was hard, and the riots against Ben-Gurion that were led by Begin led to violence, and in a famous demonstration in 52, the mob went to the Knesset and they started throwing rocks at the Knesset, and some rocks hit Knesset members, and it almost led to anarchy. So it was a very painful time. Eventually, Ben-Gurion and his foreign minister, Moshe Sharet, who later became the second prime minister of Israel, they signed the deal with Germany. And on my documentary, I'm telling this story because it turns out that the bunker was built as part of the reparations agreement, and there are some questions mark about this agreement, because the most bothering thing I learned is that estimations today are that during the Holocaust, because the thing about the agreements, what Ben-Gurion said essentially, this is not money for the crimes, for the death. It's money, it's compensation for what the Germans robbed from the Jews during the war. So they robbed us from our possessions, and this is their compensation. What the Germans got in return is de facto completely a blank page and an agreement by the State of Israel to forget the past. So they gave 1.5 billion, and they received a complete forgiveness, and allegedly. All of this, I'm quoting my interviewees from the film. It's not like necessarily my personal opinions. I'm quoting to you guys what I discovered and what historians explained to me during my journey, which is still going on. The film is not finished yet. And so the disturbing thing about this agreement is that the estimations today made by historians is that during the war, the Germans robbed a worth of $6 billion from the Jews. So they robbed $6 billion worth in the 50s, which today is like tens or maybe hundreds of billions of dollars worth. But they only paid 1.5. And why is that? It's because during negotiations, Israel was weak. Israel needed that money, and the Germans realized that. So to them, 1.5 wasn't a big sum to pay for what they got in return, which was legitimacy. And we needed the money desperately, so we didn't come to the negotiations with a strong, position. So the whole process of the negotiation was a bit weird in retrospect. Who exactly decided to build the bunker? I couldn't find any documents, official government documents, where you can see that the government decided to build this bunker. You can't see, I didn't find any protocols of discussions whether or not you should build an underground bunker. And I asked the question, was it really necessary? Because it's weird that to build such a bunker, they had to bring specialists. Specialists who apparently, architects, engineers who apparently were involved in the Holocaust, and they had to come here to supervise the works. Now, I can't really prove that, but what I do know is that the bunker was built by a company called AEG, which you might know because they still exist today. They don't really exist, but the brand still exists. AEG. They make washing machines, and that's the company that built the bunker. How do we know it? Because I found the plans for the bunker, and it has AEG signatures on it, but no names of architects who designed it, right? Now, what is this company, AEG? AEG it's a fascinating story. It was a Jewish company in the late 19th century, and during the early 20th century, it became a German company, and Jews were bought out of it. And during the war, it took a huge part in the Nazi efforts. So AEG had work factories, forced labor factories, where Jewish women were forced to produce mechanical parts. And also AEG was involved in Auschwitz. They were responsible for the entire electric infrastructure of Auschwitz. And that is the company that designed the bunker and supervised the building of the bunker. So this is pretty dark, right? I mean, we know in America, we know Operation Paperclip, and we know that Nazi scientists were part of the space plan. But in Israel, to think that only less than 10 years from the Holocaust, the government would bring here Nazis for a project in secret, in complete secrecy, that's unthinkable. But apparently that's what happened. And what I managed to do is to find a guy. His name is Yaakov. He's 94 years old. And he worked in the power station. The power station was operating between 55 and 84. And he worked there. And when I met him, he told me an incredible story. Turns out he was a Holocaust survivor. And here's the crazy part. During the Holocaust, he was in Auschwitz. And in Auschwitz, he built bunkers. He was forced labored, and he actually built bunkers for the Nazis. And one of the bunkers he built was the exact replica of this bunker, because when this guy Yaakov came here after the Holocaust, he joined the electricity company, and he was put on the construction site of the bunker to help, to give water to the employees. And he was amazed how much alike was this structure to the structure he built for the Nazis during the Holocaust, which is mind-blowing. And then he worked there. And he told me that this place saved his life because he was depressed and suicidal, and work there inside the power plant saved him, gave him meaning, which to me was mind-blowing. So in the movie, I take him to the bunker, and he explains to me, because it's deserted now and you can't see what's going on there. You can't really understand like the rooms and what was every room serving for. So he explains to me this was this and this was that. It's very, very nice experience. So that essentially, so the movie, to cut a long story short, I'm trying to answer all these questions. And there are lots of other characters. There's a German historian who writes a book, the first book about AEG. Turns out the story of AEG is so dark that no German historian wanted to research it. So he's the first historian who writes about AEG, a whole book. And he knew everything about AEG. And he knew every building that AEG built and every power plant AEG built. And when I found him on the internet and called him, he was amazed because he never heard about this place, even he. And he came here and I showed him the bunker, and it was really fascinating. Just goes to show how secret this thing is. And so I asked these questions. Some of these questions will not have answers. And the main one is, was this place even necessary? Because one of the theories that I try to explain in the movie is that maybe Israel was paranoid, too paranoid, and that it had to build this place where in fact it wasn't really necessary, but we had so much money from the Germans and somebody got a bit crazy, because when you look at this project it seems a bit megalomaniac, right? So I try to maybe raise some doubts about the necessity of this place, and I try to show and to prove that Nazis were involved in building this place. And maybe some of the questions, maybe I'll fail in the end of the movie, right? Because maybe I won't be able to prove everything that I want to prove. but at least I'll raise some questions, which is something, I guess. And yeah, I hope it was interesting to you and you find this interesting. I invite you to, if you like what you heard and you want to help me out, because making movies is extremely difficult and expensive, and I have no help from anyone. I do it all by myself with my own time and funds, except for initial very generous support that I got from the Robinson family in Pittsburgh, which helped me a lot in the beginning. But now I need more help. So if you think it's an interesting project and you want to help me, reach me out. This is my email address here. Or you can donate and help directly. I have a PayPal account and it's the same email right here. And of course, you get credit and in the film. And if you have any interesting thoughts about this and you want to write me, you're more than invited. I'm open to hear it. I gave you just a taste, and hopefully in the upcoming months I'll be able to finish it. I don't know if it'll be a 20 minutes movie, a 30 minutes movie, or a 60 minutes movie. We'll see. We'll find out during editing. But it's really interesting, and it tells the story of an era through a location. So from the bunker, I go out and to research the bigger picture and to talk for the first time about the reparations agreements, which are so nobody talks about it anymore, right? It was pushed back to the back of our minds, and we don't want to think about it and discuss it. But it was really a dark period in the history of Israel, and I think it's time that we talk about it and ask everything about these agreements, because today, as you know, Israelis go to Berlin and Israel and Germany has this complicated relationship, and it all starts from these agreements. And the bunker is a microcosm of all of that. So that's what the movie is about. So if you want to help me out, reach out, donate, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast, Two Nice Jewish Boys. I'm sure it will help you pass the time in quarantine. And that is it. I hope you liked what you heard. I wish you guys the best of health and some quality time with your loved ones. And I hope to come and visit you in better days in San Diego. I've never been to the West Coast, so I'm really looking forward. And when you're in Tel Aviv, reach out and see you around, guys. Stay safe. Thank you.